And I'd also like to acknowledge my supervisors who have supported me during my research at La Trobe University. I'm Shay Wassell, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Dear Dyslexic Foundation. And I have been doing my doctorate now for 6 years, and I'm at the final stages with some recently published research, which I'm here to talk to you about today. I can't see anyone, so please, I'm just trying to see if I can see some faces. There we go, so it doesn't feel like I'm just talking to myself. So I'm here today to present on dyslexia, and it's not something that you might think is a public health issue. The reason I'm doing my doctorate under public health looking at dyslexia is because at the age of 27, I was diagnosed with both dyslexia and dysgraphia. And it's not uncommon for young people and adults to be diagnosed with a learning disability later on in life. And for me, it sent me into what you might call my first and only so far midlife crisis. And I ended up with some significant mental health difficulties and was in and out of hospital for quite a while. And it was really because when I was diagnosed, I really had no supports, and there was a real lack of understanding about dyslexia and how it could impact on adults. And so through my personal journey and my career, I really found that there are a number of barriers to ensuring that I could succeed as an adult and succeed in my chosen career. And my research really came about because I thought I can't be the only one struggling like I have. And there is currently, until the work we've started, been no evidence-based research looking at the difficulties that people with dyslexia can face, particularly as they become adults and they enter the workforce. So my journey took me to opening the foundation that I oversee, and we only work with adults, which is unusual. Most organisations work with children through to adults, and our focus is really empowering them and empowering workforces and employers to be able to support the needs of dyslexic employees. So I just wanted to show you a quick snapshot of an infographic we created for the research. And originally I'd created a whole presentation that was very academic, and I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and thought, what's the point of talking academics if then I can't talk about how we can implement research into practice? And so I reworked my whole presentation today, so forgive me if it's a little bit disjointed. As a dyslexic, it's very common for us to do these types of things. So I don't really want to go into the detail of how we got here. I can share my research papers at the end if you'd like further information. But what I really wanted to share with everyone today is why dyslexia is a public health issue and how employers can be better supporting their dyslexic employees. So dyslexia, for those of you who do not know, is a specific learning disability, and it affects around 1 in 10 individuals. So that's quite a large population of people that are struggling, and they're struggling to read and write. And it's due to underlying phonological processing disorder. Dyslexia is a lifelong condition, so we're usually born with it, and people can have it. They have a range of IQ, so it doesn't discriminate against IQ. It's also highly genetic. So in my family, it's very much likely my dad is dyslexic, though he hasn't been formally diagnosed, one of my brothers, and then also one of my nephews as well. So it's quite strong in our family. And dyslexia impacts quality of life outcomes across the social determinants of health. So we're looking at impacts in education attainment, employment opportunities, financial security, and then there's a real stigma associated with having dyslexia, which I'll talk further about. But all these challenges can lead to poor social and emotional well-being, and in turn create significant inequality for those with dyslexia. So the core root of our challenges are phonological awareness problems, but how does that play out for someone in the workplace? So there's an array of difficulties that someone may have. Writing, particularly for me, is a real challenge. So I have quite significantly impaired writing skills. Spatial temporal challenges as well. So we may have challenges doing left and right. So if I'm in the car, I generally will go the opposite way. If someone tells me to go right, I'll go left. Background noise is really challenging for some people. So I can't concentrate if I've got the TV on or the radio on. Spelling and grammar can be significantly impacted. Motor coordination skills, so I have really bad poor hand-eye coordination. My handwriting is quite illegible as well. And then people with dyslexia can have short-term memory processing issues. So we hear the information, but we can't retain it long enough. So then we've got to go back constantly. And so that can affect understanding the alphabet, learning multiplications, times tables, and other day-to-day activities that we're faced with. What's the research is now telling us that's very common is that dyslexic people generally have some other co-occurring difficulties. So I have dysgraphia, which is a writing impairment. Some people might have ADHD, autism, dyscalculia, which affects maths ability, developmental coordination disorder is what it's called in the UK, but we still use the term dyspraxia, and speech and language disorders. This is just to name a few. There are some others. And overarching that is this constant impact on our social and emotional well-being. So when we look at people with dyslexia in the workplace, what we've seen is that, and why again dyslexia is a public health issue, is because employment and job security are key influences on health and well-being. And in Australia in particular, there really is little known about how that can affect, how dyslexia can affect the employment life cycle. I knew personally how it had affected me, but what I really wanted to know was this affecting other people? And what we've seen over the last decade in particular is an increased focus on the psychological risks and the educational needs of dyslexic individuals who are at school or in post-school education moving through to higher ed. However, there's less attention that's been focused on the process of dyslexic individuals entering into the workforce. And this is additionally important because there's now a number of legislative policies in Australia and overseas that have been developed to protect people with dyslexia from discrimination. Yet there's a commitment to those with dyslexia in the workplace that still really hasn't been established yet. So when we're looking at the employment life cycle, we're really talking about pre-employment and recruitment processes, onboarding activities, retention, career progression, and then what we hope to see when someone finishes up in a role, if they can't continue to progress in that organisation, is that they leave an organisation in a positive way and that they can move on to a new job feeling confident and have the self-esteem based on what they've developed in their previous roles. But what we're finding is this last bit can be quite challenging for people with dyslexia. So when we look at pre-employment and recruitment processes, even though for our research we were really focused on workplace experiences, what came out for us was that there was actually quite a number of barriers to getting the opportunity to be employed. And that adults with dyslexia, when they were seeking roles, they perceived a number of different types of discrimination. They were unfairly judged, and there was a lack of access to workplace reasonable adjustments during the screening and recruitment process. And what we found is that this is aligning with international research that suggests that people with dyslexia are disadvantaged when they're applying for jobs. And one of the reasons they're disadvantaged is they don't feel that it's safe to be able to disclose their disability during the recruitment process because of fear of discrimination, even though we know that legislation is protecting people with this type of disability. And some of the areas that they felt that they were discriminated against was in the pre-interview stage, where people may have to do an aptitude test, or if they were requested to write a report, it might be handwritten rather than on a computer, and they weren't able to spell check or grammar check. So they really felt that they were on the back foot when they were applying for jobs, and they weren't able to demonstrate their true capabilities for that role. This is a quote from one of our participants. And if I muck it up a little bit, please excuse me because I am dyslexic. But they said that I failed the government test. After the test, 2 ladies sat in front of me and said, "You don't look dumb. We've never seen anybody fail a test as bad as this." And I said, "Well, I'm dyslexic," and my eyes dropped. So from the onset, people are really being discriminated against and feeling judged because of their disability. Once we get into onboarding, I think some things that workplaces haven't got a good grasp of yet is the complexities of actually starting a role. So we have to fill in a number of pieces of paper to be able to sign off and start a job. So this is your employment contract, filling out our tax forms, bank forms. And in Australia, we actually we tick a box to say whether we've got a disability or not. And for a lot of people, even at that very beginning stage, they're too afraid to say that they have a disability in case something happens and they can't take that job on. Another barrier is once we've signed all that paperwork, a lot of organisations have online training that you need to do, whether it's policies and procedures, things like that. And what we find is that there's no access to reasonable adjustments to be able to undertake that training. And again, there's this ongoing fear of disclosing at this point in case they start to be pigeonholed or there's misconceptions about their ability to do their job. And so this is another participant said that dyslexics are just going to sign off on it, as in paperwork for a job regardless. And so there needs to be an alternate strategy for them to at least comprehend what they're signing off on. So the main focus really of the work we wanted to look at was the retention issues that people may be facing. And also because I had such an interest because I was facing some of these challenges. And as I did our interviewing of our participants, sometimes when they were talking, I felt like I was hearing myself back in the types of challenges that they were having. The main difficulties that someone with dyslexia may have in the workplace include sending emails. So they may have grammar and spelling mistakes, even though they may have read them multiple times. Report writing, reading speed and comprehension may be slower than their colleagues, and they feel that they're not meeting their employer expectations. And this can lead to difficulties with working relationships, because what we found was that those with dyslexia tended to have to work a lot harder than their peers. They were working for a lot longer, so they may work during their lunch break or stay back after hours to be able to complete work tasks. And so that then impacted on their ability to socialise and to build the rapport with their peers. And so they felt like they were being isolated and they were left out because they had to work back. And for some, they actually felt like people thought that they were intentionally not wanting to participate in extracurricular kind of work activities. And that wasn't the case at all. And because of this extra work, employees really felt a significant amount of mental fatigue and exhaustion, and the ongoing concern of should they disclose their dyslexia for the fear that they would not be understood or they'd be misunderstood in their capabilities. And for me personally, I have disclosed I'm dyslexic ever since I was diagnosed. And throughout my working career, the majority of time there's been a negative outcome, whether I haven't been paid the advertised salary, I've been told I thought something was wrong with you. I could spend ages just talking about the challenges I face, but what we're here to talk about is the challenges that our research is finding. But I could really relate to what our participants were talking about. And one of the key issues was the lack of understanding and awareness of dyslexia as a disability, which could then lead to discrimination, and also the lack of reasonable adjustments available during the retention process. At an organisational level, what we found was that there is a significant lack of awareness and understanding of dyslexia across organisations. So from leadership, CEOs, down to employees and team members. And so that begins a seed of difficulties for those with dyslexia, because when there's no awareness, how can you then broach a topic that's very sensitive to you, that you need help and assistance, and that you may be perceived as different to other employees. There's no specific policies and procedures to support dyslexic employees. In Australia, we have general disability and discrimination policies, but nothing that kind of helps people feel safe enough to disclose that they have dyslexia, to then be able to seek the supports that they need. And so this creates this real challenge around psychological safety within the workplace. And so what we found was that people with dyslexia were then having to hide their disability, and they were then having to put personal coping strategies in place. And that might include, again, working overtime, but sending documents out of their organisation for family and friends to look at and edit for them. And that is quite a big organisational risk when you're thinking about privacy, confidentiality, IP. And so there's significant challenges for organisations if they're not supporting their dyslexic staff. We've also seen a big shift globally around inclusion and diversity. And in Australia, that now includes neurodiversity. And even though dyslexics make up 50% of the neurodivergent cohort that we kind of looked at earlier, what we find is that those with dyslexia don't have a seat at the table yet. And so when we talk about neurodiversity, we're leaving out some of the different groups within that umbrella term. And so dyslexics aren't having the opportunity to ask for what they need and get the support that's required for them. This is another quote from one of our participants, and who was struggling to manage priorities. How do I manage priorities on conflicting pressures and multiple tasks with the burden of writing and editing? How do I get it done in time with an influx of work at the same time? The mental load that this has on someone who is struggling to organise thoughts, prioritise, juggle a plethora of parts. It's an enormous mental load. Another interesting finding that we weren't expecting was the impact on career progression, and the international literature supports the fact that those with dyslexia do struggle to progress their careers, particularly in organisations where they may have had to disclose because they have had difficulties or they've been performance managed, and then they feel like they've hit a ceiling, a glass ceiling. They feel like that their dyslexia may be holding them back, that there's preconceived ideas that people with dyslexia can't progress within the current role or within an organisation. And so then they lack the opportunities and support that they need and that they deserve to progress their careers. What we also found and what we know is that dyslexic employees, like all employees, bring many strengths to a workplace. And for those with dyslexia, they bring a number of personal resources that they're drawing from. And those personal resources are partly because they've had to hide or mask their difficulties. So they've got great skill set in problem solving and being able to find workaround solutions to challenges and difficulties in the workplace, because they're constantly having to do it day to day just to mask their own disability. They demonstrate high levels of self-efficacy. So they know that when they come into a role, they actually have a lot of strengths that they can contribute and bring. And it's just this one component where they need some support in as well. They're extremely resilient and persistent in their roles, and they come to work day in, day out, regardless of the fact that they can face significant challenges in their organisations. They have a high level of self-awareness of what they can do, but also what they can't do. And again, that comes back to those personal resources and strategies around how they mitigate their dyslexic challenges. Again, I mentioned they've got strong problem-solving skills. They can be quite visionary, big picture thinkers, and be quite creative thinkers in the way that they see problems. And all these skills are really, really important in the way that our workplaces are changing and our working environments are changing at the moment, particularly after COVID. So what does this mean for dyslexic employees when we're looking at all the difficulties and how an organisation can start to support them? We know that if people are constantly faced with barriers in the workplace, and if we're looking at the social determinants of health and we see that those with dyslexia are struggling across a number of different areas, it's not just in the workplace, then we can start to see that those with dyslexia can start to feel a significant amount of stress and start to have poor mental health and well-being within the workplace that can lead to job burnout. And we do know that those with dyslexia are twice as likely to have anxiety and depression compared to the rest of the population, and are 46% more likely to attempt suicide compared to the general population. And separate research we've done as part of my thesis project has been looking at the mental health and well-being, and from the data we collected, we know that those with dyslexia have lower levels of overall mental health and well-being compared to the population. So they're already facing a number of challenges, and then they're coming to work and they're trying to mitigate and manage a whole set of challenges just in the workplace. And in Australia, untreated mental health conditions in the workplace are now estimated costing $11 billion a year. So that's a significant amount of money to employers. And so it's important that they're addressing these mental health concerns for those with dyslexia. So how can we create a more inclusive working environment for not just dyslexic employees, but for everyone? We know that if we reduce the job demands for people with dyslexia and provide them with the right types of job resources, then we are going to improve employee well-being. Job burnout can be moderated by various factors, including giving greater autonomy to individuals, supportive work colleagues and managers, and organisations taking steps to allow for easy access of workplace reasonable adjustments. If we are able to adapt and review our policies and procedures from recruitment practices all the way through to retention and then career progression, and these practices are fair and reasonable, then we know that we're able to support dyslexic employees. One of our key findings across our research has been the importance of upskilling and training managers and leadership to have a better understanding of dyslexia and have an awareness of dyslexia, not just the challenges that those with dyslexia have, but also the strengths that they can bring to their role, and they are many. And so instead of working from a deficit model, and we see a deficit model across education, in health, in employment, what we're trying to do is transition to a more strength-based approach where everybody in the team brings strengths and everybody in the team brings areas that they need to build on. And so if we're coming from a strength-based approach, then that benefits everyone in the team. You're not just singling out those with dyslexia. And then we really need to look at workplace culture and how we can improve that. And again, part of that is that education and awareness training across organisations. But it's also developing self-awareness of individuals and then creating psychologically safe environments where everybody is able to talk about difficulties that they're having in the workplace, not just those with dyslexia. Because when we all show vulnerability, then we're able to become trusting and build that engagement and support within teams, which is really important if we want to meet our bottom line and we want our organisation to be meeting our targets. And for an employer, that's what we're coming back to. Why is this important? It's not just important to make sure you've got a strong mentally health workforce, but you're also meeting your KPIs and your financial targets. So dyslexia does not have to be a major barrier to success in any occupation. And when in a supportive, informed working environment, employees with dyslexia really can thrive. So I think I'm just nearly on time. And so really to conclude, we know that employees with dyslexia are facing significant challenges, not just in Australia, but globally in workplaces. And there are some countries like the UK that are doing a significant amount of work to try to improve that. And when we don't support dyslexic employees, we're leaving them vulnerable to job burnout and poor mental health and wellbeing, which is what we don't want to see. And employers really do play a vital role in improving job resources and reducing the overwhelming job demands that those with dyslexia can face. And this ensures that they stay engaged in their work and are mentally healthy. And really working with dyslexic strengths can make a significant contribution to teams and to organisations as a whole. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the 3 research papers that I drew from today that have just been published, 2 in the International Journal of Environmental Health and Public Health, and then 1 in the Australian Journal of Learning Difficulties. And if you'd like more information on the work we do in supporting young people and adults with dyslexia, please feel free to email at admin@dyslexic.com, or if you're interested to test out my UR code, which I've been practicing on, you can also download a Neurodivergent WorkSafe checklist. And it really goes through our second research paper using the job demands resource model of burnout, and it breaks it down into different categories so you can have a look to see quickly how your organisation is or isn't supporting neurodivergent staff and what you could do to support them. So thank you everyone for listening. I am really appreciative that I've got to share my research